Hello, welcome back to the Art of Communication series. This is workshop 3. I am your host, Grace McBride. And as you know, I have developed these workshops in collaboration with Community Connect South Shoalhaven. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and we will dive into today's workshop. Okay, let me just make this full screen for you. Okay, beautiful. So, workshop 3. This is where we will start to develop something called content pillars. And the reason we develop content pillars is that they can guide you to create consistent and impactful messaging, i.e., communication. So let's dive in. 3 goals in today's workshop. The first is we're going to identify your brand values. Our second goal is to create your content pillars. And our third goal is to do some content ideation together. Now, I'm just going to do a quick recap. When I say brand, I'm I know that it's very common to get a bit shy of the word brand because it feels quite commercial. But when I say brand, just to remember that brand is basically the public persona of your community group or your organization. So your brand is all the ways that people interact with you. It's sort of like your personality. So it's how people feel about you and perceive you. Okay. So, um, brand is just kind of like a catch-all term for me to say your organization. So when I say brand, that's what I mean. Let's jump in. Okay, let's recap on what we've learned so far in our workshops together. Number 1, if you confuse, you lose. So remember that people every day are completely bombarded with information. And so the only way to cut through to them is to have a really clear brand story. Okay, so the more that you communicate simply and clearly, the more effective you'll be. Rule number 2, if you speak to everyone, you speak to no one. So understanding your audience is the absolute critical first step in every single piece of communication you create. And we dove into that in workshop 2. So really remembering that we always come back to, at our core as communicators, who am I trying to communicate with? And the more that you understand that, the better your communication will be. And we also learnt that different audiences can require different brand stories, right? So in workshop 2, we once we developed an audience persona, we looked at how we can tailor our messaging and our communication or our brand story to suit. So I wanted to show you what this can look like in theory. So here is the example of, again, rolling with our ongoing example of a community group that helps parents and kids who are experiencing bullying, right? So the different audiences that we might have for that community group are, of course, the parents, carers, and guardians of those kids experiencing bullying, the kids themselves, the volunteers, the funders or donors that support the organisation, and the schools and other stakeholders that you might be working with, psychologists, people who run your workshops and programs. Okay. Um, Now, if you want to, and I do encourage it, as you know, to be more specific, you could start to dive deeper into these audience groups. So, identifying the different age groups of the volunteers that you're working with, the difference between a community funder, so someone in the community who might give you $20 versus a really big funding body who might give you $10,000. So, you might want to start to separate these audiences down. But for the purpose of this exercise, to show you how the brand story audience connection works, you can see that it's not as though you definitely need to have a different brand story for every single audience group. There will be some, like volunteers, funders, and donors, and schools and other stakeholders who can probably all relate to one brand story. Um, Versus these two, where parents and kids, they are the people receiving your organization's help, and they're very different. So, very different audiences, very different needs. So, we have 2 different brand stories for them. So, just a quick recap of what that can look like. Now, what I often get asked at this point is, cool, Grace, I know who I'm talking to and I have my brand story, but is that all I'm allowed to say now? Like, what do I put on my flyers? How do I communicate a specific workshop or a program I've got coming up? So, no, you, of course, will have so many other pieces of content, other stories, other programs, other promotion that you will need to do that can't be encapsulated just simply by telling your brand story over and over again. I want you to think about your brand story as the hero narrative, the hero story that you tell about your organization. But of course, you're going to have lots of other communication that needs to go out. Um, so, what we need to do is start to expand that type of content. Um, like I said, now that you've got an audience and you've got a strong brand story, the next step is to make sure that your content, the other things that you're communicating, um, remain fresh and engaging and effective. So, you need to start branching out and telling other types of content. What I mean by other types of content and ways to expand your storytelling or your communication and things like this, everything from the educational content you might have, blog posts, how-to guides, explainer videos, the storytelling and testimonials available to you, so case studies and success stories, um, visual content, the videos you might do recapping an event or an infographic you might create. Um, and, this other thing I've got here, interactive content. So live events, workshops, things that you're doing all the time. Okay. So they're all the different types of communication that you might be doing. But this is often where people go wrong. And it's not just you, this is me, this is everyone who is in a communication role, full stop, will get stuck in this trap in the race to create content, so flyers for an upcoming workshop, the event programming itself for that workshop, the social media posts that you use to promote it, the emails and newsletters you send to encourage attendance, in the race to just do the job, communicate that you have an event coming up, your communication can get really messy because you might be time poor, you might be resource poor, you might be the only person in your organization who is doing this communication, and you might have a full-time job and all these other things. It doesn't matter. There are 1,000 reasons where this will become messy. But when we are racing to just get the job done and just communicate and just tell people what's going on, it can often lead to really scattered messaging and a brand identity. So, again, that personality that feels a bit diluted or confusing. Yeah. So, if that's you, you're not alone. Every single communicator I know, whether they're working for a multi-million dollar business or they're volunteering in a community group, this is the consistent problem. When you are just trying to communicate that certain things are going on and you don't have the time to have thought behind it, communication can get really messy. So, the antidote to that. If you need to create great content consistently, if you need to communicate effectively consistently, which is what I want you to be able to do, you need something to guide you. And that's where content pillars can come into play. So, why do we need content pillars and what are content pillars? Okay, content pillars are, I like to think of them as messaging buckets or communication buckets. And they ensure that your communication remains really consistent and strategic and aligned with not only your audience's interests, but also your values as an organization, your brand values. When you have buckets of content that you know, or buckets of communication that you know are considered and aligned with your goals and your audience needs, it's so much easier to generate ideas for content, reinforce key themes, and maintain a really strong voice for your organization, a really clear brand voice. Basically, when you have content pillars, everything becomes easier because you know that you've already done the thinking. And as long as you're creating within those content pillars, even if it is in a massive rush, and you know that they're aligned with those content pillars, then it's aligned with the greater overarching strategy. So, to create content pillars, to create these buckets of communication, this will all become clear soon, I promise. I like to use a tool that I call the content pillar compass. And it looks a little bit like this. Now I'm just going to flick over to your worksheet. And you can see here that I've stepped this out. So we've got your brand, core values of your brand, the audience needs, content goals, and then from there we create content pillars. And I've separated this out into your worksheet so that you've got space to do your brand values, your audience themes or audience needs, they've also called it, your content goals, and then your content pillars, okay? But then I've also given it to you in this layout. So it's up to you. You can go through and use the worksheet in this section as a bit of a messy brain dump and then come to the compass page, which is this page, or you can work directly into this sheet. It doesn't matter. I just wanted to give you both options. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to step through that process now, starting with your brand values. Okay, so these are just a few brand values that I see come up quite a lot for community groups that I've put here. But I want you now to, I'm just going to jump back to this page, to have a think about what are the ideas or the beliefs or the the values, the things that your organization stands for. I want you to think about what they might be, and you might already know, but let's pull these up. You might be you might be community group that's really grounded in sustainability. You might be all about inclusion. You might be all about innovation, or advocacy or respect. So I want you to think about some of the brand values that have defined your organization so far, and just choose a few and write them down into your workbook. Okay, hit pause. Okay, am I back? Hope so. Okay, so the second thing that I need you to define or answer is your audience themes. Now, I also call these audience needs because sometimes it's easier to think about them as a need rather than a theme, but they mean the same thing. Okay, so how do we define your audience themes, audience needs? Well, we can do that by looking back at our audience persona work from workshop 2. So think about who is your primary audience, or for this case, who is the audience you're trying to communicate with? What are their main needs, their main challenges or interests related to your work? And what questions or problems do they often have that you can solve, right? And by getting to the core of these audience needs or themes, you start to bridge the gap between your brand values and the content you create. So we're starting to draw some connections. So have a think about these questions. Who is this audience? What are their main needs, challenges, or interests related to the work that your organization does? And what questions or problems do they often have that you can address? I want you to think about that. And then I want you to jot them down and think about how they might start to group into some themes. So the example I've given you here is, again, our organization that helps parents of kids experiencing bullying. Yeah, the themes that we identified might be anxiety support, um, because their main audience is, a parent. If this is the parents of these kids that they help, one of their main needs or challenges might be just dealing with anxiety for themselves and for their children. Self-care tips. Can you see how we've tried to find a theme behind the questions or problems that they might often have and how they interrelate with the challenges or interests? And then we've got another one, parenting through challenges, just another audience theme that starts to come up. So I want you to have a think about those questions, think about your audience, and start to pull together some common needs or themes as you see them. Okay, hit pause and then come back to me. Okay, I hope I'm back. Step three, we want to identify your content goals. Now, when I say content goals, I mean, what is it? What is the step that you want someone to take, the action that you want them to take after engaging with your piece of communication, whether that's a flyer or an email or an in-person conversation? What is the outcome that you want them to do? Whether that's join a workshop, download a PDF resource, make a phone call, donate. And secondly, how do you want them to feel, or what do you want them to take away from your communication? Okay, those are two different things. What do you want them to, how do you want them to feel? How do you want them to, what do you want them to have learnt? And what action or outcome do you want from them? Hit pause and then go and write these down. Okay, once you have a bit of a list here, I want you to narrow it down to the two or three most important goals from your work. So, driving donations, increasing awareness about what you do, um, education on your key issues that you deal with, right? Okay, hit pause and try to define it. Okay, now is the fun part. Okay, so you've got your core brand values, you've got your audience needs or themes, and you've got your content goals. So I'm going to talk you through how I use these three areas to start to define content pillars. Now, I know all of this can feel a bit confusing, and I know you've just trusted me so far. I'm going to try and step you through this next part, okay? All right. So for this organization that helps the parents and of kids experiencing bullying, we have these core values: empowerment, community, education, advocacy, and compassion. Those are the organization's brand values. Their audience needs: anxiety support, self-care tips, school and community advocacy, online safety, event information, and understanding bullying, right? So those are all the kinds of themes that came up when they were thinking about their audience. So everything from the really practical things like, when is the next event? Is it online or in person? Where is it? How much does it cost? All of those practical things, all the way through to how do I keep my kids safe online is something that might come up a lot for this group, versus self-care tips and anxiety support, right? So there's all their different audience themes and needs that come up. Their content goals are to raise awareness, so educating parents about the impact of bullying and the available resources they have. Driving support, so increasing support from both funders and volunteers. Encouraging action, so equipping parents with the strategies they need to advocate for their teens, maybe with the school, maybe with other parents. Increasing attendance, so just getting more attendance from kids and teens and their parents at workshops and programs. And strengthening advocacy, so encouraging parents to push for systemic changes in schools, so really supporting that advocacy process. Okay, so out of those three areas, the content pillars that I came up with were: one, testimonials; two, understanding teen bullying; three, building resilient families; four, effective communication strategies; and five, advocacy for safer schools. Okay, so how did I get there and what the hell do they mean? Okay, so testimonials. I looked at our core values and I saw, okay, compassion and understanding bullying from our audience needs, and quite a few goals. So increasing attendance, driving support, and raising awareness. Well, all of that comes to testimonials, right? So a really good testimonial of um, a mum whose daughter was experiencing bullying and came to took her kid through some workshops and came out the other side. Well, a really strong testimonial like that. One, it helps the audience understand what bullying may look like because there are lots of different ways that it presents, and different testimonials can show that. Two, it brings on that core value of compassion. So the more that people understand the bullying process, the more their compassion might increase. And in content goals, testimonials absolutely raise awareness of the impact of bullying, can absolutely drive support for a volunteer or a funder to hear a story about a kid experiencing bullying and think, gosh, I might contribute here, I might help. And three, it can really increase attendance. That's a success story. It was effective. The workshop worked. The program worked. I might send my daughter in next because it worked for that other mum and it worked for that other girl. So, um, can you see how we start to build these pillars or these buckets of messaging? Now, I really want to dive into what I mean by that now. So, when I'm talking about a content pillar, I'm thinking about, okay, I am an organization, like I said, that works with kids and parents of kids experiencing bullying. And I have lots of different things I need to communicate all the time. I need to talk to my volunteers to encourage them, well, potential volunteers to encourage them to sign up. I need to talk to my existing volunteers to get them to come along to help me do things. I need to talk to funders and donors and get them to donate. I need to communicate to parents to really help educate them about what bullying looks like and how they can support both themselves and their kids, and how to advocate for their kids at schools and in other places. And um, I need to help them, learn how to communicate more effectively with parents, other parents, their kids, other kids, and the school system, right? So there's lots of things that I need to be doing here. Lots of different communication that needs to go out. There might be newsletters that need to go out, Facebook posts, flyers, um, you know, uh, research papers, all the kinds of things, funding proposals, all this different communication that needs to go out. And so by creating really considered buckets of communication that are based on your audience needs, your core values, and your content goals, you're building a strategy for the types of content and the types of communication that you'll put out. So, by having a bucket of testimonials, I know, okay, based on my audience themes and my brand values and my content goals, I am always going to need to be using testimonials. So that's going to be one bucket of communication that I know that I will consistently tell testimonials. Okay. Number two, understanding teen bullying. Well, that might draw on my audience needs of understanding bullying and school and community advocacy. It probably pulls on a core value of education and advocacy, and it probably pulls on a content goal of, let's say, encouraging action because you're equipping parents with strategies, raising awareness, and probably strengthening advocacy. So, understanding teen bullying, okay, that's another bucket now that I know I can share tips, promote events that are all about understanding teen bullying, create infographics that help people, etc., and so on and so on. So, building resilient families, that's another bucket where I might talk about ways that you can build resilience in your family, sharing tips, sharing how-tos, promoting events that talk about it. So again, you can start to see how um, having that bucket means that I can go, all right, cool. I know now I can communicate about that in that bucket. So that's how we start to put this together. So over to you now. I want you to think about your audience themes, your core values, your content goals, and see if you can start to build out some ideas for content pillars. Now, this is going to be a shock to no one, but testimonials is usually always a content pillar. It is for most organizations. I'm sure it will be for you. So put testimonials down, but have a think about what are the other things that I need to be communicating regularly. And one of them might be just the really practical things of like, you might have an audience need that is just, where are you? How can I help? When's the next event? So you might have a content pillar that is just the practical 101s of where we are, how to find us, that's an absolutely acceptable content pillar. So that might be something you need to be communicating all the time. You might need to always be doing Facebook posts that say where you are, how people can find you, and what program is coming up next. So that's a totally acceptable content pillar. Um, I know this can be really tricky to do, and I don't expect you to do it perfectly now, but I would love you to have a go at just putting maybe two or three content pillars together. So hit pause, have a crack at this, and then come back to me. Okie dokie. Are we back? Awesome. Right, now that you have your content pillars, we can start to define and validate them. Now, this is a really important step, and if you joined us at the live workshop, you'll know that this is the part where you start to go, oh, hang on, maybe I didn't have this right. Okay, so uh, once you've got your two or three content pillars in front of you, I want you to ask yourself these questions, these three questions for each content pillar that you identified. So, number one, does this align with our mission? With whatever your organization's overall goal is, does it align? Is it part of what you should be doing? Yes or no? Um, does this content pillar address an audience need? If you are sharing practical how-tos where we are, is that something that your audience actually needs? Do they need to know where your building is? Do they need to know your email address? Do they need to know all of those things? For some of you, absolutely, yes, it will be really important. I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, but Lorene with U3A was saying that something her audience often, the question she was often answering for her audience was, where do I find you? Where is the building? How do I get there? And often that might be because they are new to town or they just don't, they've never heard of where it is before. And so, yes, absolutely. If your content is practical, how to find us, where we are, what program is coming up next, then yes, it absolutely addresses an audience need. Now, this is the most important question. Number three, can we consistently create content under this theme? So let's use this same example again. If you actually, let's use a different example. Let's say we're going back to our teen bullying organization, and one of them was building resilient families, like we identified. Do you have enough stories? Do you have enough resources? Do you have enough knowledge to share to consistently be creating content or communicating effectively about building resilient families? That might be an amazing content pillar, but if you can't produce consistently under that content pillar, it's probably not accurate for you right now. And at this point, I would ask you to consider a fourth question, which is not in this workshop, but that's for a reason. And that is, sorry, it's not in this worksheet. That's for a reason, is I want you to think about, okay, what am I already communicating a lot? What is making up the majority of the conversations I have with people about what we do? The promotional content I might be putting out, the flyers, the posters, the newsletters, the social media posts. What am I constantly communicating already? And does that need to be grouped as a content pillar? And can I define that and can I validate that now? So I want you to have a think about that. Okay, now this is the fun part. Okay, hopefully by now you have some content pillars. Now, I know that in my belief, and I know that from doing this workshop a few times before, that this step is the absolute hardest. This process of defining content pillars can be really challenging. Thinking about your brand values, your audience needs, your content goals, it can be quite confusing, and trying to pull that together as content pillars takes a lot of practice and it's not easy to do. So if you are struggling with this, please, please, please reach out to the team at Community Connect and let them know they're there to help you, and so am I. We can absolutely help you figure this out. So please don't suffer in isolation or in confusion. This step and this workshop can be really challenging to do on your own. So please reach out if you need a hand. Okay, our last little step together now, uh, generating content ideas. This is the fun part. So now that you have your content pillars, I want you to start brainstorming the different content, the different stories, different things that you need to communicate for those pillars. So, in your workbook, if I can just, I love that it always does this. I'll just quickly click back through. Oops, did it again. Um, Here, you want to start building out content ideas for one content pillar. So just choose one of your content pillars. And at this point, it's probably good not to choose testimonials because you'll just write down a bunch of great stories, which you should do at some point, but it's the easy one, right? You probably got lots of testimonials you could rattle off. So instead, I've used the example here, building resilient families. And some content ideas that you could start to be communicating under that pillar are things like a blog post on your website of 5 daily self-care practices, a short video series that you put out, which is how to start a gratitude practice with your kids, or an infographic on signs it's time to seek help for your teen. Okay, so all of this would fall under building resilient families because it's all about tips and resources that help families communicate well with each other, know when to seek help, and know how to build communication strategies between each other and tools and tips to build resilience as a family, right? So I want you to choose one of your pillars and I want you to start thinking about different content pieces you could start to tell in your communication. So if I go over to our slides, some ideas for generating content ideas, that you think about what questions are my target audiences always asking me? What do I wish I knew when I was in my target audience's shoes? Um, think about how you could find stories that meet your content needs. So again, if one of your content pillars was self-care tips, how could you spark stories about taking time for yourself? So thinking about those stories that you could start to tell. Um, a really great, often overlooked thing is what resources or content do you already have that you can draw from? So if you've already run an event on, say, gratitude or meditation for teens, are there tips in there that you could be pulling out and sharing in your newsletter or sharing as a Facebook post or sharing in conversation with someone when talking about that workshop? And ask your audiences. So if you do have some, let's say, some parents that you're working with in your organization, say, what do you want to know more about when it comes to self-care tips that we could help you with? And then generate content ideas from there. So I want you to go back to your worksheet now and just have a brainstorm, start to put down some ideas for content that fall under one of your content pillars. Okay, am I back? All right. So, just a little bit here now on content planning. So, the idea of these content pillars, like I said right at the top, is they are supposed to make it easier for you to create great and engaging content consistently, right? And another way to create great content consistently is to plan your content out. And that's why I love content pillars so much because let's say you have 5 content pillars and you know that you have a weekly newsletter, say you've got a weekly newsletter, and you might know that someone in your team puts out, say, I don't know, 3 Facebook posts a week, let's say that. And then there might be a flyer that goes out every 6 months. Okay. So you'd start to think about, okay, there's going to be all these things I need to promote, all these events coming up, all these things I need to be communicating about. The next programs are starting, the different workshops, there's going to be a donation drive. There's all these things I need to be communicating about. And you've got your content pillars. And so you can go, okay, I've got 5 content pillars, which means that I just need to, if we're doing 3 Facebook posts a week, well, let's say that's roughly 15 posts. If there's 5 weeks in a month, most months, that's okay. That's 15 pieces of content that needs to go out on Facebook, which means, okay, well, I've got 5 content pillars, so I just need 3 pieces of content under each pillar, and I've done my Facebook planning. And so on with your newsletters, it might be okay, I just need each year for doing a weekly newsletter, I've got 52 pieces of content. Well, that's just about 10 pieces of content under each content pillar, 10 newsletters on each theme, right? So then it becomes really easy. It means that rather than being reactive and going, oh my God, that event is next week and I haven't told anyone about it, and I've got to go and quickly make a bunch of phone calls and quickly send out some emails and quickly do a Facebook post, you can sit down at the start of the month and go, right, okay, I just need to find 3 testimonials, 3 self-care tips, 3 pieces on building resilient families, blocks, and so on and so on. Quickly ask the team to help me or get that done, and then the content is done for the month, right? So um, that's what I mean by batching content creation. Um, that's why the content pillars are so helpful because they can help you start to batch content because you already know what your pillars are and you already know that you're going to be doing, certain styles of communication all the time. Okay. Secondly, as a content planning tip, repurpose your stories, repurpose your content. So think about how to use one testimonial in a number of different ways. It could be a newsletter, it could be an Instagram post, it could be in a speech that you're doing or a talk you're giving at a local event, or it could be a story that you're sharing in conversation with people. So, how do you take one idea, one testimonial, one self-care tip, and how do you use it across multiple pieces of content, again, to cut down on the amount of communication you need to be creating from scratch every single time? So that's us for workshop 3. I know it is a lot. This is a really big lesson, this one, and it can feel, like I said, really overwhelming. So please, I encourage you, if you are struggling with this step, please reach out to the Community Connect team. I'm more than happy to be contacted. They'll reach out to me and get me on email or on the phone, and we'll help you out. I definitely don't want you to feel alone in this. It can be really tricky, but I promise is absolutely worth doing this work and figuring out what your content pillars are. Because once you have, like I said, your brand story and your audiences, and then you know what types of content you need to be creating consistently, your communication all starts to feel a lot easier. And planning your content becomes even easier again. Okay, good luck. Please reach out if you need a hand, and I will see you in workshop 4.